Well, several analysts across the globe who've been weighing in on this just ended summit between the US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un say that a declaration signed by the two leaders lacks substance. Trump and Kim signed a joint agreement after their unprecedented talks in Singapore, agreeing to process towards the full denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Trump says that he has developed a special bond with Kim, who until today was one of the most shunned leaders of one of the most isolated countries on the planet. To help us dissect all of this a little bit further, we're now joined from our Pretoria studios by political analyst Proffessor Dirk Kotze. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome to the program. I have to tell you, I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning to watch this historic moment, and I could feel the pomp and ceremony and the excitement, but at the end I'm wondering, was it worth staying up for? Your reaction?
Well, first of all, I think no one can expect that negotiations that only lasted for a few hours can produce breathtaking results. I think this is a first step. It is about signing an agreement or understanding about very general principles, but that is how most negotiations start. I think it would have been unrealistic for anyone to expect that the details about, for example, removal of the nuclear weapons will be spelled out in this agreement. And what we have seen already is that President Trump announced that his Minister of Defense, the Secretary of Defense, Mike Pompeo, will continue with negotiations after this event. It is a good beginning, but I think, as many people will say, the devil lies in the details of this. And in the past, there has been similar events or similar agreements that didn't produce the results. We've seen even after the meeting between the two presidents of the two Koreas, of where there was almost a deadlock, and when it was very much uncertain whether this event of yesterday would have continued. So this is the nature of diplomacy, and I think we should not expect just a easy ride through all of this. There's going to be difficult situations, as we've seen also in the negotiations with Iran a few years ago.
All right, so perhaps if I ask you in a different way, is the Korean Peninsula better off today than it was yesterday as a result of the signing of this agreement?
I think so, in the sense that it is the beginning of a process that one can call maybe that of trust and confidence building between the US and North Korea. It will have benefits for Japan, it will have benefits for South Korea in the immediate term. As I indicated, that I think the real test will be the long term, when the detail of this agreement must be worked out, when the very most difficult aspect of denuclearization will have to be spelled out and agreed upon. At this stage, it's only about the very general principles, about the very general statement. There's no commitments, there's no detailed commitments yet about how it is going to be done. And as we've seen in the case of the Iran negotiations, it took more than a year in order to reach a final agreement of how to do it. And even then, President Trump now withdrew from that agreement because he said it wasn't sufficiently negotiated. So there's a lot of work that lies ahead in order to really implement the first steps that were taken yesterday.
Do you think that this meeting in some way has legitimized Kim Jong-un? I mean, up until now, nobody really wanted to deal with him, but by meeting the most powerful man, arguably, in the world, shaking his hand, having a photo op with him, he's almost now counted in.
Well, that is indeed, I think, the negotiations, the purpose of the negotiations from the North Korean point of view. We also have to refer back to the so-called six-party talks of about 10 years ago between the two Koreas, the US, China, Japan, which had also the same objective, and that is to bring back North Korea into the international community. And that is possibly the main objective of North Korea, is to be able to be seen to be talking directly with the US and not in a multi-party dispensation, and to be seen as being legitimized, as you say, in the international community. That is certainly the first objective of North Korea. From an American point of view, it's obviously more about security and about the nuclear matter. But I think as a result of that, for example, the statement that President Bush made some years back of saying North Korea is one of the rogue states of the world, that certainly has been set aside by what we've heard today and yesterday from President Trump.
What does this mean for Russia and China, both superpowers with a vested interest in what's happening in that part of the world?
I think most importantly is how it affects China. China has been lately the most or the closest ally of North Korea, and to a large extent was the lifeline for North Korea also during its difficult times. Russia, I think, is in a slightly different position. Their relationship with North Korea is not as intimate as that with China. But ultimately, I think what we are seeing is that the US is now moved again into that part of Asia, which will not be necessarily supported by Russia and China, though in terms of their public statements, they've so far supported the latest developments. I think in the end we are going to see somehow some form of competition about who is going to be the main power in the Far East and that part of the East. And the US will over time possibly have quite a lot of competition. We have seen that in the latest statement that there's indications that they will stop the military exercises. The US will stop the military exercises with South Korea, but they were very explicit that they are not going to withdraw the American troops. The same applies also to the American troops in Japan. So in that sense, one can see that there's still a sort of a military competition between the main powers, especially China and the US. Russia is, for that matter, not so much directly involved in a military sense in that part of the region.
All right, we've run out of time, but very briefly, if you can answer this. Kim Jong-un's going to go back to North Korea, and one would say that it was a PR success for him. Donald Trump, he goes back to America. What can he tell the American people that he got out of this agreement in this summit?
Well, I think what he's going to say is that the world today will be safer than the world a week ago. That he has a firm commitment from the North Koreans that they are going to reduce and ultimately to remove their nuclear capability, the military nuclear capability of them. I'm not sure that is a firm statement or claim that he can make, but he will certainly do that. I think he will also compare it with the Iranian deal and say, well, this is the way to negotiate, and not the flawed deal, according to him, that the Obama administration negotiated with the Iranians. So obviously there's going to be comparisons made between the Iranian agreement and this tentative agreement that we've seen now. And we will have to see to what extent President Trump can prove that he actually negotiated a better agreement than the Iranian agreement.
All right, so South Africa, what does it mean for us? I know that a country like Zimbabwe has been a great friend of North Korea. They helped Zimbabwe during the struggle and post that. South Africa's relationship with North Korea, they've not been enemies, so what does this all mean?
Well, South Africa has diplomatic relations with both Koreas. The North Korean diplomatic presence in South Africa is not very prominent, but it's still here. I think South Africa itself prides itself for the steps it took more than 20 years ago about denuclearizing its own nuclear capability. So South Africa will certainly welcome this as a first step. And from that point of view, I think they will try to support the agreements and support North Korea specifically. But in terms of bilateral relations between South Africa and North Korea, it is not much. There's not a very significant relationship between North Korea and South Africa in terms of trade or any other form. It is more of a political, diplomatic relationship that does exist. And therefore, it will not necessarily affect South Africa very directly.
All right, Prof, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your insights, as always, invaluable to us. Thank you for your time, sir.